Penalties under the Acts and legislations are as follows. Crown Court penalties can include prison for up to 2 years or unlimited fines. However, the majority of prosecutions are handled more commonly by the magistrates' courts. The guidelines for penalties in the magistrates' court allow for £5,000 per offence plus prison for up to 6 months, or a maximum fine of £20,000 with prison for up to 6 months if merited by the case. Penalties in the Scottish Sheriff's Court and parts of Ireland may vary slightly. Forms of defence under the law. If you or your company are found guilty of rendering or supplying food that is injurious to health, then under the law you only have 2 forms of defence that will be taken into account by the courts. The first is due diligence, where you or your company can prove through documentation that you have taken every reasonable step to protect your food from becoming injurious. The second is to prove the guilt was elsewhere in the food chain. Again, some form of documentation or photographic evidence is essential to prove that the problem was outside of your reasonable control. An example of this might be a foreign body within a baked meat pie or bread loaf.
So who are the enforcers of the Acts and regulations? The Food Standards Agency. This is the UK government body that is principally responsible for the implementation of the Food Acts and the EC regulations. The Environmental Health Officers. These are the agency's local council-based enforcers who are tasked with ensuring that the Food Standard Agency's legislations are achieved. So what powers do the Environmental Health Officers have to give them the ability to act? Because of the potential dangers to human life attributed to unsafe food, the local Environmental Health Officers have significant powers to allow them to act quickly in order to stem a food-borne problem. These powers include entering the premises unannounced, taking samples, inspecting food environments and systems. They can demand all reasonable access and assistance. They may copy documents, take photographs or videos as required. They can apply for a warrant of entry to the Justice of the Peace if access is refused. They can enter business premises at any time, but must give 24 hours notice if the food premises is also a private house. It is important to note an Environmental Health Officer must always be able to prove their identity before being allowed to enter.
So what permitted actions do the Environmental Health Officers have when they find food to be suspicious of being unfit for consumption? A decision to detain. They can issue notice of non-consumption, defining how and where the items should be stored until released. A detention of food notice. With this they may seize the foods and remove them from site, where they must be then dealt with by the Justice of the Peace within 21 days, from which they must either be released or placed under a food condemnation notice. An improvement notice. They can identify substandard practices or environments and set targets to be achieved over a stated period of time. Prohibition notices and orders. The Environmental Health Office can issue a notice prior to the Justice of the Peace order to stop the use of premises, items of equipment, or the use of substandard practices until the notice or order are lifted. Emergency prohibition notices. They can issue an interim notice before the Justice of the Peace confirms an emergency prohibition order. An emergency prohibition order can be used to close part or whole of a business or stop a business operator from trading until the order is lifted. Mutual agreement. The environmental health officers may seek a voluntary prohibition of use or practice by mutual agreement. So, what as to the costs of actions? Where an action is upheld by the Justice of the Peace, all costs will be charged to the caterer. Where an action is not upheld by the Justice of the Peace, the caterer may apply for the recompense of reasonable expenses from the court.
The right of appeal by the caterer. An environmental health office, through the Justice of the Peace, can in effect stop a caterer from trading and thus remove their livelihood until the action is lifted. For varying reasons, the process of prosecution or collection of proof may take longer than is thought reasonable by one party or another, and so two clauses for appeal have been written into law, and they are under the following specific circumstances. A. If the enforcement authority refuses to issue a certificate lifting an emergency prohibition order for more than 1 month, unless otherwise stated for specific reasons. And B. If the enforcement authority closes a business by refusing, suspending or revoking registration for more than 1 month unless otherwise stated, again for specific reason.
You are now ready to proceed on to your general reminders of information learned, to be followed by your Safe Food Hygiene Level 2 Food Safety Certificate exam.
Good luck.
Good luck.